So how are these two concepts connected, the earth and the self, through this conduit or this flow of sacredness? I should really be asking, how did these two get separated in the first place? That's the real question. As one of my late great teachers, the physicist philosopher David Bohm used to say, we make false unifications based on false divisions. The idea that the earth and the self are separate is actually a complete illusion on multiple levels, from quantum physics to ecology to spirituality. The sacred elements not only become our bodies and beings, they are our bodies and beings, literally and metaphorically. Through air, wind, we have our breath, our spirit. Every moment we breathe in earth, we breathe in that spirit into our bodies, the most fundamental thing that gives us life. This is why meditation practices, I believe, focus so much on the breath to remind us of that. The Maoris of Aotearoa, New Zealand, have a concept, te ha. This is the breath of life that we all share. Through the earth, through the soil, we have our flesh, we have our blood, carbon, hydrogen, iron, nitrogen. I could go on and on the periodic table. These earth elements, which are stardust, are in our physical beings. So sacred earth and sacred self are again united there through our tangible, most embodied physical flesh. Through water, we have, yes, our blood flowing through us like rivers, and we have our emotions. All those fluid, dreamlike, intuitive, dynamic feelings that we have is like the subtlety of water. You can see through it sometimes, other times there's reflections. So our emotional world is often connected to the sacredness of the water world on planet Earth. And through fire, we have our spirits, fiery spirits and passions and aspirations. So again, sacred earth, sacred self are tangibly, literally connected, not just metaphorically.
When our rabbis say that the Torah is a tree of life, they're referencing, in part, this Kabbalistic notion of the tree of life. This tree of life that sees all of creation, that sees us as almost inverted, upside-down trees, where the roots are in heaven and the earth is down here. And so all that is of the earth, whether it's flowers or fruit, whether it's food, whether it's the beauty of nature, whether it's physical pleasure, all that is of the fruit of earth is meant to draw us back to the roots. And so in a sense, the more embodied that we become, the more we are connected to God. And when we eat of the fruit, when we eat all food, we're told that we're supposed to bless. The Torah says that you will eat, you will be satisfied, and you will bless. And when we bless, when we allow that food to enter us, we are completing that circle. We are reconnecting back to the roots.
To me, what prompts me toward religion is the existence of the uncanny, the unexplainable. That there should be something and not nothing seems to me to be wonderful. And I don't think that that can be empirically dealt with.
So I read somewhere that Buddhists believed that we have a moral obligation to all living beings. That is actually the first precept in Buddhism from the very earliest years, which is to ahimsa in Sanskrit, to cause the least possible harm to all beings. It's not an absolute prohibition against killing, but it says be aware of what you're doing, be conscious of what you're doing, and do as little of it as possible. I admired that, and I came back to that later and enlarged my sense of Buddhism with that. Mm-hmm. But I also was aware that Native American religions had a very strong sense of the importance of respecting non-human beings, and I also embraced unconsciously or consciously, but I mean naturally, the idea that the world was alive and that there was a spirit in things. So I became an animist. And I've been an animist all my life. That was one of the things I liked about Buddhism. They could tolerate animism.
All religions are kind of like languages, that we're all saying the same thing, communicating to God in our own unique way.
The purpose of human existence, I'm going to speak from my tradition. This is the Festival of Faiths. So I'm going to speak from my tradition, but I think this could be shared by many peoples. There's a verse in the Quran that tells us that one of the reasons why we were created was for the cultivation of the earth. That the verse says that it was God who brought you into the being from the earth and settled you therein to cultivate it. Sta'marakum fiha. So imara is cultivation, and it indicates a lot of different things that humans do. And this is why anybody who's involved in cultivation of the earth in a positive way is fulfilling a divine purpose, whether they believe in the divine or not. That they are fulfilling a divine purpose. And this is often lost on religious peoples that are working from a provincial tradition and not recognizing that everybody is here for a reason. The second is the purpose is actually to worship, to adore the Creator. And this is obviously from the Abrahamic traditions, that I only created unseen beings and human beings to worship me. And then finally, stewardship. The idea of being caretakers of what we've been given. This is called the Khalifa. And the Khalifa is one who stands in place. And the Quran tells us that God said, I'm placing in the earth a steward. And a steward is one who acts on the behalf of another. And so this is divine stewardship. And then David, we're told in the Jewish tradition, that David, we have made you a steward over the land, judge fairly between people, do not follow your desires. There's a really important point about this, because stewardship is corrupted by following desires.
The garden is our oldest metaphor. In Genesis, God creates the first Adam from the Adamah, the human from the humus, and tells him to till and keep it, the fertile soil on which all life depends. Human from humus. Since World War II, as a result of excessive tillage and use of petrochemicals, we've managed to squander a third of our country's topsoil. With the combined challenges of climate change, peak oil, and the global food crisis, the balance of life on Earth is rapidly approaching a tipping point. In the ways that we grow and share our food, we have largely lost our connection with the Adamah. We have failed to live in the garden. Well, that's the bummer outer part of my talk, and I'm just going to get that out of the way right now, okay? I'm not going to stand here and bum you out for 45 minutes as people start creeping toward the door, right? No, I actually want to tell you stories of hope because I think that's where we need to look. I think we know enough now. We know enough of the damage we're doing. We know the causes. We know the whys and the wherefores. It's a matter of having the will to change, right? It's a matter of having the will to live into something better, into a more beautiful vision of the world. Dismas was in his early 20s. I asked him, I said, Dismas, why'd you come to the monastery? And he said, I'd studied academic theology at Notre Dame for 4 years. And he said, my faith was all from here up. It's all from my shoulders up. He said, I came to the monastery because I wanted to put the faith in my hands. He said, some questions can't be worked out intellectually. He said they need to be worked out bodily. And I love that idea that manual labor is a way that we can work out spiritual questions without actually cognitively being aware of that.
Well, there's the issue of mystery and of our own limits, and of the, for me, inescapable sense that there are things that are real that I don't know. It's hard for us modern people to talk about this because we have got this idea of objective or absolute empirical truth, which I doubt. So you need some kind of framework to put that problem in, your own limits, the mystery of our existence here, which is wonderful, literally.
Well,
But
enjoying mystery and enjoying doubt becomes part of it.
It's, sure.
Yeah.
Well, how much is doubt and how much is mystery? How much is ignorance? But the other thing that prompts me is the issue of practice, and that's where Gary is, and my very marginal understanding of Buddhism have really helped me. Gary's orientation to practice, which means practical practice.
Yeah,
having something to do.
That's what Buddhism does. In Buddhism, they don't talk about faith ever. You know, what is faith to anybody? What do you do is the question. When you meet somebody on the trail up in Tibet, you don't ask what's their religion. You say, who's your teacher and what is your practice? And it's assumed that you're really working on something or thinking about something.
So the idea of right livelihood plugged a big hole in Christianity for me as it came to me. There was no concept of right livelihood. The churches taught that there was such a thing as full-time Christian service, by which they meant being a song leader or a missionary or a preacher. The rest of us just had to get along the best we could. We had no practice. And I think that's still largely true of Christianity. So I needed that idea of what right livelihood might be and what might be the standards by which it could be determined. And then I would go to ecology for that, as I think you would. Don't destroy your home, please.
Leave something for the future.
Leave something for the future. Yeah. Which doesn't exist either.
We don't know.
Yes, at a certain point, the sun will burn out. Yes, there's going to be another ice, whatever is going to happen. At some point, there will be no more human species, probably, in some sense. Just looking at the world sort of in realistic, forget about, some sort of grand cosmological kind of view of things. So what is it, knowing that, and knowing that some of the religions talk about that a transcendental way of looking at things, that your heaven is going to be to come, and you just need to believe while you're here, and then you're going to get there. Or the old school caste system of India, which is you're born this way, you got to live this way, and and not fight for any kind of change. But what I would have said to Gary, you are a Buddhist, and you know that your future is dependent on the quality of your present. And the quality of your present and the quality of your future depends on your compassion for others and the wisdom that you have to help the situation, whatever it is. In our case, we have a major situation that we have to, we need a level of fierceness, not just kind of soft spirituality, but a fierceness, like we had during the civil rights time. Where you're going to stand up in that movie, I'm fed up and I'm not going to take it anymore. Right. Kind of fierceness. Because the level of change that's required is beyond most of our comprehension right now. How are we going to change our lifestyles? Right. To simplify so that we're not putting that tremendous pressure on the earth that we've been doing. So how do you do that? Unless you have a really strong inner core that really sincerely believes that and knows that the future of the earth, knows that your future happiness, the happiness of your children, the happiness of all of your people to come, depend on your commitment now to make a change in your life, to use love, to simplify, and to create an internal practice, whether it comes from Christian or Sufi or Hindu, or whether you're spiritual but not religious or spiritually independent, to find that within, to anchor you so that you can make the kind of changes that we all need.
I try to make art that makes us think differently. Of course, I think we learn better, we take in a message better if we're entertained than if we're told. So I make art which has a message, and that message is all about these everyday things we do which are causing damage. And the impact, the positive impact that we can all have by changing these things a little bit. This is the waste from the making of toilet paper. It's in Canada, in Thunder Bay, and this is deforestation for the making of toilet paper and the most popular facial tissues. I try not to use brand names because rather than vilify a particular company, I would rather us change our behavior and therefore change the market. As an artist, it's so hard. How do I make a picture of climate change? Sure, we can take a picture of power plants, coal-burning power plants, which we know are one of the largest single causes of climate change. This one, by the way, is just up the Ohio River from us. And this is the ash which they produce, which is just up the Ohio River and is leaching into the Ohio River and the groundwater in Shippingsport. This shot, it's actually the same place. Those woods are where I was hiding to take this shot. And it's really the quintessential mountaintop removal shot. I'm very proud when one of my pictures becomes the defining picture of something. Even if it's mountaintop removal mining. But how crazy is it to be cutting down a mountain to get a little bit of coal? I try to draw those long connections which are hidden in our world. Who would know that if you buy a certain roll of toilet paper that the boreal forest is being cut down to get it to us? It's not, no one tells us that, and why would we know unless we're crazy enough to actually dig into the facts? But I think we need to be. That's really the message of what I do, is that we really must stop being consumers and be citizens. I think to be an adult means being responsible for the impact of everything we do.
What are the roots of this crisis? At the heart of it is the modern doctrine of the consumer. Now, what's interesting to me is that the consumer in Old English meant the devil. He was called the consumer because he consumed the souls of people. And consumption was a name for the wasting disease in the 19th century. It's what killed people slowly. I've lived in cultures where they recycle everything because it's just simply, that's what they do. When I lived with the Bedouin, they use everything. Literally, they don't throw away anything. I want to point out, in traditional cosmology, what happens inside of us happens outside of us. If you want to know why the oceans are acidic, it's because we're becoming acidic. Literally. We are becoming acidic. The world manifests our states, and that's why knowing our states is so important, because how we are, how we behave, what we do, all of this is going to be reflected in the world. The macrocosm can only reflect the microcosm. And so the acidosis of the oceans is related to the acidic levels that are happening. People are moving away from the natural state, which is an alkaline state, and moving towards an acidic state. And this is what happens when, by 2050, 1/3 of Americans will have diabetes at current rates. And if you look, there's a relationship between carbohydrates and hydrocarbons. There's a relationship chemically. So you're dealing, what we're using, oil is like sugar. We're giving the earth diabetes. It's becoming acidic. Our soil is becoming acidic, and our oceans are becoming acidic because we're using cheap energy. Sugar is a very quick energy for our bodies. Oil is a very quick, easily digested energy for our machines and for heating our homes. And so this results in this acidic state. And this is what diabetic acidosis is related, as far as this is my belief, that it's related to the acidic state of the planet.
At every level, people are trying to keep up with the next level. And we're on this treadmill of consumption. Point is, that treadmill of consumption drives up the carbon footprint. So those countries with the greatest inequality, they say, are also the ones with the highest carbon footprints who are doing the most to damage our climate through climate change. The headline, therefore, is, if we want to mitigate against climate change, now we're already going to have to adapt to what's happening already, but if we want to mitigate further damage, we need to start looking at inequality in nations and between nations as another way of bringing down our carbon footprints. I don't hear some of the leaders of the climate change movement talking about this. We're still talking about the science. Let's get off the science. That's in. Let's talk about inequality and some of the ethical and moral reasons why we should be doing something about climate change. So if we really want to understand sustainability, our focus should be on both human equality and environmental quality together. I think there's absolutely enough evidence to say, let's stop separating out environmental quality and human equality, social justice and environmental protection. These are too interrelated, and the reason why we're not doing well on either is because we're not linking them.
One of our, friends who comes to Bioneers who speaks is actually Iroquois Six Nations from Canada, Okie Forrest, but she has been living and working in Chiapas with the Mayan people for about the last 30 plus years. And we had the chance to sit down with her, and she told me some of the Mayan cosmology about this time and this moment that we're in right now. And I'd like to share some of her words about that. The Mayan people call this moment the time of no time. From here on, we're on Earth time. Mother Earth is shaking to her core. It's a time of madness, disconnection, and hyper-individualism. It's also a time when new energies are coming into the world, when people are growing a new skin. The Mayan vision says we in the West will find safe harbor only if we can journey past a wall of mirrors. The mirrors will drive us mad unless we have a strong heart. Some mirrors delude us with an infinity of reflections of our vanity and shadows. Others paralyze us with terror and rage, feeding an empire that manufactures our fear into resignation. But the empire has no roots and it's toppling all around us. In this time, everyone is called to take a stand. Everyone is called to be a leader. To get beyond the wall of mirrors, the final challenge is to pass through a tiny door. To do this, we must make ourselves very, very small, to be very humble. Then we must burrow down into the earth where indigenous consciousness lives. On the other side is a clear pond. There, for the first time, we'll be able to see our true reflection. In this time of no time, we can go in any direction we want by dreaming it. Our dreaming can shift the course of the world. And paradoxically, this moment that we're facing now, this crisis, is exactly the dream of our current civilization. The dream of endless growth, materialism, hyper-individualism, and domination has turned into a nightmare. So how do we dream our way out of that nightmare? Well, one way is to wake up, and that's exactly what's happening all over the world, and people are awakening, I think, to a new dream.
As I've been learning about whole systems, here are a few of the principles that I just want to mention. One is that in nature, the only constant is change. And as human beings, you know, we tend not to like change very much. We tend to resist it, we tend to avoid it, we tend to deny it. And so it's part of my practice for myself of cultivating what I call full spectrum leadership, to orient myself in a positive direction towards change, to recognize that there's got to be something good in it, and we are living in a time of tremendous upheaval and change.
Let's say we're moving away from an age of reductionism into a new era where we understand that everything is connected, everything is working systemically, which makes it very hard for scientists to work because they're used to measuring the difference between 2 or 3 things, and they hate, you know, a research program which has many different parameters. And yet, in real life, that's how things are. And so perhaps we can use metaphor as a way of understanding the truth of that.
Living systems are what scientists call holonic. And I learned this from Joanna Macy. Holonic is H-O-L-O-N-I-C, and what it describes is essentially the same thing as above, so below. It describes fractals. It describes the quality like those Russian dolls that nest one within the other. It essentially means that what's true for the part is true for the whole, and what's true for the whole is true for the part. And so we cycle back to as above, so below, and sacred self, sacred earth.
How do we restore and reconsecrate a sacred relationship with Mother Earth? And I'm thinking of really getting back to the basics. We need to really think of our fundamental needs, not our wants. And these basics are our food and our water. For the Navajo Nation, food is chi'iyan, chi'iyan. This means chi, connected to, you know, other languages, is actually the intestines and is connected to the earth going down. Yan is connected to an upward movement. So fundamental to the concept of food in the Navajo language, chi'iyan, you have the earth below and the heavens above, or for them, father or a male gender above and a female gender below. And so chi'iyan, food, means the balancing and the integration of matter and spirit, of heaven and earth, above and below. So that core concept reframes the way we think about food.
It's all connected. It's one of the most basic precepts in life. And so you have to solve the whole problem. You can't silo these things.
We've got the science. We know what we need to do. We have the science of sustainability, but we're not doing it. And that's where the social science, the psychology, sociology, anthropology comes in. And this is, you know, the point about climate change. We are hooked on the debate about science. Climate change isn't about science, it's about psychology. It's about our addiction to a way of life. We're addicted to oil. That's the problem. And so if we're addicted, we need the psychologists to help us come down from this addiction if we're going to deal with climate change. It's not about science. We know what to do, we're not doing it. Thank you.
There's been a dramatic decline in the soil carbon bank. And it now turns out that the soil is the largest reservoir of carbon on the planet. It exceeds the rainforests, the oceans, everything. And it is the only area where if we changed our farming practices on a large scale, we could actually re-lock up some of the CO2 that's currently in the atmosphere back in the soil. That approach is being applied in Egypt on a very large-scale program called the Sechem project, where they are making composts and restoring desert soils to incredible productivity simply by using very sort of modern composting techniques based on ancient principles and introducing soil organic matter, which holds water and just primes the sort of ecological cycle. So there's great hope, I think, that we can, through applying some of this knowledge, we can bring about these changes at scale.
You will never know how absolutely fascinating mushrooms and fungi are until you meet Paul Stamets, but there was a huge spill of diesel fuel near his little farm up in Washington State. They brought in all the bioremediation companies to have at it. They gave them each a cell of dirt about 20 feet square, contaminated with diesel fuel. And what Paul did is he inoculated the pile with the spore from oyster mushrooms that you would buy and eat, gourmet mushrooms from the store. They all came back about 6 weeks later, and one by one they're ripping the tarps off these things, and the stench of hydrocarbons is overwhelming. If they were working at all, it was very, very slow. And then they get to Paul's, right? And they rip the tarp off, and it is blanketed with oyster mushrooms, some of them 2 feet in diameter. They tested the flesh of the mushrooms, they tested the soil, essentially no trace whatsoever of diesel left. That's only the beginning. The story gets even better. So what then happened was the mushrooms started to decay. Worms and maggots came in to eat the mushrooms. Birds came in to eat the worms. The birds brought seeds on their feathers, and within a matter of weeks, this dead, contaminated dirt turned into an oasis of fertility. You don't actually need an engineer, you need a gardener, right? I mean, this is something that we talk about citizen science. This could be done globally, and it's unlike a Superfund site, it doesn't take hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. It takes very little money and mostly some people power and some knowledge.
We're aiming to paint a picture of hope, and that is, I think certainly what motivates you every day is all that can happen in the face of these great challenges. That you're very optimistic, actually. I would say, is that true?
I think. I mean, the truth is we don't know what's going to happen, and all we can do is to try to serve in the best way we can through our practical efforts in life, with perhaps a higher purpose, mindful of a possible higher purpose, and then the results are not in our hands. But I think if enough people are aligned in this, there's no limit to what could be done, and we simply don't know what's going to happen next. But it seems to me that this idea of service, to try to do the right thing, it's striving, really, isn't it? It's what one needs to, what one's strivings are in life, and those strivings are in the right direction, and they're against some of the bad stuff that we're all worried about now.
I love that idea of service. I think that what we're talking about, what you're talking about, certainly as it relates to the metaphor, it's quite simple. I mean, we were just given meditation instruction an hour ago, and it's remarkably simple on the one hand. The doing of it requires a little bit of, let's say, dehabituating or letting go of old habits, which is the practice, right? The practice of sort of focusing and concentrating and really in many ways letting go of the old habit of, in this case, in a case of meditation, clinging on to our thoughts, and in a sense, retraining ourselves to have a new habit of just being able to be present.
Yes, and of course, the fruit of meditation is that the quality of the fresh thoughts which can arise when one has placed one's attention inside one's body and resisted the pull of these thoughts which steal one's attention, is that you then are in a position to have better observation and therefore better quality of thoughts, which we do need to address some of these issues.
Contemplation is the response to a call from him who has no voice, and who yet speaks in everything that is, and who, most of all, speaks in the depths of our own being. It is awakening, enlightenment, and the amazing intuitive grasp by which love gains certitude of God's creative and dynamic intervention in our daily life. Contemplation is life itself, fully awake, fully active, fully aware that it is alive.
A lot of people want to give up when they hear how bad everything is, but I'm not for that. That's just too comfortable. I don't like to hear it, and I like to have something to do. So I would like to continue to do my work the best I can, enjoy it, which I do. The world is still full of beauty. and that there's still many acts of real goodness taking place all around. And so there's a lot to live for. But I will say that I don't think you ought to be an environmentalist. I'm so tired of that word environment. I would like you, if you can, to show me where the line can be drawn between an organism and its environment. I don't think the line can be drawn. I think it's useful in certain college courses to talk about an organism in its environment. But that's completely hypothetical and wrong. The environment is in you. It's passing through you. You're breathing it in and out. You and every other creature. So we've got to have a better way of talking about it. Environment is the surroundings, and we're not surrounded. We're in it. There's no way to get away from it. That's the comedy of it.
There's a verse in the Quran that says that we elevate those who do not want to sow corruption in the earth or to be elevated. And this is what we have to remember as a species, that we have people in this world that remind us of who we really are. We're not mindless, spineless consumers. We have human hearts. We have the ability to know infinity. We can conceptualize it. No other species can do that. We are something amazing. And we have to remind our young people of that. Lost in this world of false idols, of images of women that are so degrading. They are so degrading, and I don't need to name names because you know them. You see them on the television. You see them on the covers of magazines. This is not who we want our young girls to grow up emulating. We don't want our young men to grow up emulating the lowest forms of life on this earth. The cockroaches, the rats, the jellyfish. We want them to soar with the eagles. And that's what we're here to do and to remind people. And that's why, as far as I'm concerned, as religious people, the religious leadership, we have failed so dramatically. We have failed our young people. We have the halo effect, and then we have the clay feet syndrome. They don't see people walking their talk. They don't see people living it. They don't see the gift of sanctity in their beings, in their presence. And that's what we need to remind ourselves, that we have to become these people. We have to be these people that have graced this earth, reminding us this is not what it's about. We're here for a short temporal time, and we have work to do. And our work is in discovering ourselves and in serving others. This is the work. We're not here to consume. We're not here to indulge ourselves. We're here for something much greater, and we constantly need to be reminded because we're a forgetful species.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله The sacred comes out when we are compassionate people. And compassionate doesn't just mean feeling sorry for others. Dr. Martin Luther King said, true compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. Muhammad Ali, another one of our hometown heroes, said, service to others is the rent you pay for your room here on earth. And Albert Einstein said, only a life lived for others is a life worthwhile. So what's going on here? We've got a minister, a boxer, a scientific genius all agreeing on something. I think it's fair to say that it's simple, but it's profound at the same time. And that is the idea that no matter what your occupation in life, your so-called standing in life, whatever your goal is, we should all serve the same